Okay.
Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Rider Rumblings video podcast. I am, as always, here with my worthy constituent, Dr. Murray McCormick, and we're discussing, among other things, the Rough Riders' back-to-back losses to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, first in the Labor Day Classic and subsequently in the Banjo Bowl. The Rough Riders' offense has lately at least been putting up fewer points than the Toronto Blue Jays, who Murray is honoring in his T-shirt today. I'd like to start off, though, by expressing condolences to the family and friends and admirers of a great man, a giant in the Canadian broadcasting industry, Bruce Cowie. Bruce died September 7th in Kelowna. Former Rough Rider president from 76 to 78, longtime booster of the team. He spearheaded the Defend Our Turf program, which raised $1.7 million and allowed for the artificial turf to be replaced at dear old Taylor Field in 2000. Just contributed to the community in so many ways. I went to high school and elementary school with his daughter, Karen. Bruce was a friend of my parents, a friend of many people. So I'd like to, and Bruce was inducted into the Plaza of Honor in 2000. So I'd like to start off by expressing the condolences there to Bruce Cowie and to the Bruce Cowie family, pardon me. So that being said, Riders versus Bombers, what do you make of those two games? I can't say you were fortunate to have seen the Banjo Bowl, but you were there. What do you make of whatever that was on Saturday? Saturday. These days are blending together.
You know something? I think the Riders are going to have a little bit of company when it comes to getting thumped by the Blue Bombers this year.
True enough.
I think the Riders, like the Bombers, just did everything so well. The first half was close, kind of close, but the second half they did so many things well. They do everything well. Like, think what they line up against. I know this is a Rider Rumblings cast, but we got to look at the Bombers a bit. They have the MOP candidate in the quarterback. They probably arguably have the best offensive line. Great receivers. They got a great defensive line. They got a middle linebacker who dropped back nearly 20 yards and intercepted Cody Fajardo with a diving catch. They have American safety, which gives them that advantage. They've done everything to build a great team. Now, we've both been around the CFL a long time to watch teams with great starts sometimes cool off, like the Calgary Stampeders have done numerous times. But the Blue Bombers are just so balanced that I don't know who's going to beat them again. And when I was watching the game in the Banjo Bowl, I'm thinking, how did the Blue Bombers lose a game to Toronto? They're so balanced. So am I pushing the panic button over the Riders? How about we go to the concern button before we hit the panic button? I think there's a lot of things the Riders should have done better against them, but I think the Blue Bombers didn't expose the Riders as what they are. It just shows the Riders aren't there, and I don't know if they're going to get there yet. We'll have to see what happens. But don't you think that way, that the Bombers are just so good, Rob, that right now the other 8 CFL teams are playing catch up?
Yeah, that's why I picked the Bombers for last. Another great prognostication on my behalf. But you look at that flaw, and that team is tough to find a flaw. And coming into the season, you had to wonder whether Zach Collaros was just an aberration, or it was an aberration the way Zach Collaros played for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in 2019. But no, he's just carried through, and he's looking like the Zach Collaros who in 2015 at this time of year was being touted as the most outstanding player candidate. Now, qualified by saying that not a single player in the Canadian Football League has been dazzling this year, and there's still a considerable portion of the season left in which someone can make a case, probably a better case than there is right now for Zach Collaros. But if he keeps going the way he is, and that team keeps going the way it is, it would take an upset such as Winnipeg defeating Hamilton in the 2019 Grey Cup for the expected not to materialize. So yeah, give credit to the Bombers, but I also think there's, as you mentioned, where there's a lot of things the Riders can do better. They are seriously hampered though by injuries and a lack of playmaking ability on offense. And I'm not sure even if everybody's healthy. I still think that offense has some issues. But you subtract Shaq Evans from the equation, and there really is no semblance of a vertical passing game, and that really is a factor. You look at Kyran Moore, who's their most dangerous receiver. He's not even averaging 9 yards a catch this year. His longest gain is 27 yards. This is someone who went off for 98 yards in 2019. So I think you can also make a case that they're not using their weapons the way they should use them, and that they don't have an abundance of weapons to begin with, but those which they do have aren't really being deployed. So
Is there a
that
receiver
offense
that's
doesn't scare anybody. There's just
that's
not a
exactly
lot of sizzle there.
that's exactly. And I saw CJOB talking to Doug Brown, and Doug Brown, like, there's not a receiver on that core. I just say, oh boy, you better watch this guy because he's going to burn you down the field. Kyron Moore, maybe, but they're not utilizing him that way. So there's nobody on the offense that scares you. The defense is so banged up right now, you don't even know what to say about them. You know, you look at AC Leonard's out with that stupid suspension for not being able to provide a drug sample, but Mike Adams down now, Ed Gainey's down now, Lucius Purefoy's playing with something like kind of called a floating rib, which I can only imagine what's that like when you tackle someone. You look at, so they have so many defensive issues right now. They don't know what
Micah Johnson's been playing, missed a
but
game, and really wasn't that effective last week, but nobody was, and he's playing hurt, probably.
they all seem to be playing hurt. It just
Yeah.
seems to be. And the big one is, and you and I have talked about, we mentioned way back when, what happens if Cody Fajardo gets hurt? And you watch that play over and over again, his head slams against that turf hard.
Yeah.
Well, from my angle in the press box, I couldn't really see how hard it was. When you watch it over on TV, that was no glancing blow, and he grabs his head immediately. I know Craig called it minor, but he's kind of maybe.
I'm not sure there's such thing as a minor concussion.
There's nothing now. No, they're all real. They're
like
all
a
real.
minor gunshot wound. If you're wounded, you're wounded. A concussion's a concussion.
But he looked great yesterday, Rob. Like, I know, without the benefit of having talked to Craig Dickinson before practice, he looked like his usual self out there. And I really mean that. I did not see anything that indicated this was a guy that was limited in snaps or reps because of a concussion. But then you watch a little closer and you see Isaac Harker's getting more reps. Like, he doesn't get many reps. As I've explained many times before, if there's 100 reps, the starter may get 70, the backup may get 10, and the other two guys get 5 between them. There's really it's all about getting ready for the game. So there's not a lot of time for backups to get reps. And that's pretty normal across the CFL. So Harker is one little thing about Harker, Rob, and I know you kind of like him. He's pretty slight, eh? When I was talking, when we were looking at Cody, I was watching the two of them and comparing, going and comparing to Paxton Lynch and even Mason Fine. He's very slight as a quarterback. It'll be interesting to see what he does against the Argonauts if he does get that opportunity to play there. He can still play. I'm not saying just because you don't have a belly like me, you can't play, but it's just noticed that he seems slighter than most quarterbacks seem to be right now, which might be something to keep an eye on.
If I'm Craig Dickinson, I play the long game here. I love watching Cody Fajardo play. I love him as a player. As a person, he's top notch. But when you're looking at a game here that's not against a divisional rival, would be played only 6 days after your quarterback was concussed, regardless of the degree to which he was concussed, I think you play the long game here. Isaac Harker has shown that he can win one out of the bullpen. He was a winning quarterback the last time the Rough Riders clinched first place in the West Division. That hasn't happened a lot in my lifetime. So, or in anyone's lifetime. So I would exercise extreme caution here and pretty much mothball Cody for a week. And if it costs you a game, it's not a 4-point game. I think the risks exceed the rewards here. Yeah, I mean, it might Cody Fajardo might be absolutely fine. He might go out and throw for 350 yards and run for 100. But I would give myself the luxury of time here and take another week.
Concussion is not like a sprain or something like you can take a shot for it to kind of hide it. The symptoms show up afterwards too. Like, that's what Craig mentioned yesterday. They want to see what he's like after practice to see how he reacts. Like, I've never had a concussion, so I'm not quite sure what the symptoms are. I just know you don't feel very well, and there's headaches and blurred vision and all sorts of things that come out after you get active. And that's why they tell you to lay in a bed, keep in a dark room when you're covering. So I think it'll be interesting to see what Craig Dickinson has to say going forward after having talked to Cody, who kind of, I don't know if pushed it, but took some reps yesterday. So we won't see what happened on Wednesday because Wednesday was a closed practice, and we'll have to trust their word. But I kind of with you on the long plan. But can you imagine Rider Nation if they lose 3 in a row and went back to 3-3? Does that?
Well, 3-3 isn't the end of the world. It's not 1-5. It's not 0-6. And it's 3-3 and a chance to make up ground once you play a pretty West heavy schedule. the rest of the way. It's not like they have 2 games against all the Eastern teams this year. You really get into a heavy concentration of West games after this, and you get into a heavy concentration of road games as well. And I just would be exceedingly cautious here. They may get away with it if they play them, but a short week I don't think is the time to roll the dice with your quarterback, even if he's able to recite the first 600 lines of Macbeth on Friday morning. I don't know. I just am not
So
comfortable
important.
with that timeline.
Also, I just want to mention one thing on the Blue Bombers. They do have a flaw, their kicking game.
Yes.
You hold your breath when they back up, regardless of who's there. You go, holy smokes, is this guy going to make it? And he doesn't make it. So there's a flaw. Just remember to mention that kicking game. Mind you, the kicking game wasn't particularly spectacular on the Riders' part either on Saturday.
No.
I think it was.
Brett
It was
Lother
windy.
missed 2 field goals, and
it's interesting how
the
the
Regina
wind.
Thunder's kicker made a 51-yarder to win a game in Saskatoon.
Yeah, but
Bombers take note.
Brett's made. I don't think the Bombers ever get him. The wind swirls in IG Field though. You can look at the flags; they seem to change directions. You can't. So that's what Craig had mentioned too. That there might have been some different winds that the kickers just weren't used to. I don't know. I think if you can't kick in the wind in the CFL, boy, I haven't got a long career. I just think it's tough.
Ask Dave Ridgway. Dave Ridgway, after his second stint with the Rough Riders, after he was traded to Montreal or traded to Edmonton, then sent to Montreal in '87, and then came back. Dave Ridgway kicked in the windiest place in the world, and in his extended second stint with the Rough Riders, basically raised the bar for all kickers accuracy-wise. So Brett Lother endured those wins and made 90% of his kicks as a first-year rider in 2018. So it can be done.
But there has to be some, as Craig said, there has to be some reason why these kickers weren't as accurate as they normally should be in a game. But I don't think the kicking game was the reason the Riders lost so badly.
No,
17 points in 2 games. You go, and you pointed out that the Blue Jays have scored, I don't know, hundreds.
Well, there were 3 straight games in which the Blue Jays hit double figures, and the Rough Riders have not hit double figures in their last 2. So again, maybe it's not that surprising, but you look at the offense and opportunities that do go to waste, and you look at the on the first drive, Jake Hardy probably could have caught that pass. Now it was a bit behind him too.
Yeah, it was.
But you catch that pass, and then you're in scoring territory. They are very rarely infringed upon the 20-yard line in back-to-back games. They've gone more than 2 complete games without an offensive touchdown, more than 3 complete games without a touchdown pass, etc. They did get the running game going last week, and so there's that to be said for it. But
and they basically
the passing game is really worrisome.
They basically abandoned it in the second half, though. They didn't have much of a running game because
it got away from them. But
the Blue Bombers. There
was one situation they got comfortably into Bombers territory in the first half, and then they throw back-to-back incompletions when the running game's going well.
I know.
Stick with it. Stick with it. I just don't get it. What you finally got the running game going. It's the one element of your offense that is working well, and you're depleted up front. You're depleted as far as your receiving core anyway. Stick with it. Don't get yourself in a 2nd and 10 situation. Put yourself in a 2nd and 5 situation. William Powell was going to get you 5 or 6 yards every time.
How many times you watch a football game where the running game is very, very effective till they get down near the end zone and the OC starts throwing the ball? Every level they do it at. You go, why do you do it? And then once I asked Stephen McAdoo about that, and he didn't provide an answer. I don't think they like to be questioned on their calls very much, even though they make them. So I always find it funny when they get down in the end zone, march, hand off, pass, field goal. But okay, commercial. I don't know why the CFL does that, or even the other leagues do it. I want to go, and I know you touched upon it in your column. I had one of my first holy smokes moment when I read the email from the CFL last week that AC Leonard had been suspended for failure to. I keep calling it failure to launch. That's not probably what it is, but failure to provide a drug sample. And I went, I've never seen that in all my years of reading about football. Maybe it's happened, and I went, and it's AC Leonard. This is not exactly one of the guys you don't really need. Here's a guy you want on the roster the whole time, rushing the passer and doing his things. And he's gone for 2 games suspended for failing to generate a sample. And from what I understand, he left annoyed with the tester because he couldn't do it. So, and the thing about football, and I always talk about
one question: why is he allowed to leave? Shouldn't there be
I
somebody
know.
like standing beside him and saying,
Well,
"Here's
the
a
P
Coke"?
test, the tester stands there the whole time. Like
But somebody
once
from the
you
rider organization should
should
have
have been
made
there
sure he did
telling.
not leave.
Yes, he
Like,
should have been.
where's the overseer?
Gene Mikulski used to tell me that football was the ultimate team game, and he would list each position's importance for each position. And when I read that, I went, "Here's a guy who put himself above the team in a situation where he shouldn't have. He should have just somehow. I don't know how you do it. I don't. Just keep drinking water, I guess, till you provide a sample. I don't think you need a lot. And I think he just got mad and he stomped away. And we won't find out what he has to say if he ever has to say, because he doesn't have to talk to us again till Monday.
And this is what bugs me. If Cody Fajardo has a bad game, he's got to answer for it right away. If Craig Dickinson makes some questionable calls, he's got to answer for it right away. And guess what? Craig Dickinson and Cody Fajardo are both absolutely sensational when accountability is the issue and in accepting accountability. But then a situation happens where one of the best pass rushers on the team, probably the best pass rusher on the team, a very important player going into a very important game, is not playing because of this reason. I think you have to address it. I think you have to take the initiative and go out of queue if possible, if necessary, and address it and get it out of the way. Guess what? It's still in the air now. And when AC Leonard returns to practice next week, when he presumably returns to practice next week, everybody in the media is going to ask for him, and he's going to have to answer those questions, and it's going to be a deferred distraction. Why not get it out of the way immediately, and then a week from now, with the divisional game coming up, you can just talk about football. Why not get that out of the way and emulate Messrs. Dickinson and Fajardo and be accountable?
I also think it brings me back to Andrew Harris's issue when he got testified. But he was in front of the media. He came forward, like, regardless of what you think he did right or wrong, he did stand up and answer questions. He didn't it never got out of the way because it turned out to be far bigger than we thought. But I thought with Andrew Harris. See, I think the Riders, you don't have to, but they should have. They should have had him out there, test positive on. It should have been out there on Tuesday this week when the first day of practice. AC Leonard, but maybe
The
they don't have to.
initiative should have been his.
Yeah, it should have been.
That's
Hey,
not. But look at it though. Andrew Harris, remember the Andrew Harris situation last year, and Rider fans had great fun
19.
with that situation, 2019.
Sorry.
But guess what? Marcus Thigpen was suspended for 2 games, and now AC Leonard suspended for 2 games. So I don't think the Rider fans can take the high ground on this one. And if you're looking at it, if I'm the Ottawa Redblacks, I'm still angry because Marcus Thigpen was suspended after running wild against the Ottawa Redblacks in the 2017 playoffs. So I think that's a far more serious situation in terms of its impact upon a game than anything that Andrew Harris is alleged to have done according to the tests, or the AC Leonard situation. But that one, I mean, just people are selective.
Remember Odell Willis and his impaired driving charge? First day of training camp, Odell Willis stood up there and answered all our questions, and it became part of the season. But it just went on. Like, yeah, okay, answer the questions, get out of the way, move on. That's what the best way to do in communications. Or some people say,
get out in front of the story.
Get in front of the story, exactly.
And render it a non-story. Make it a Friday news dump. Get out of the way.
Like, speaking of news dumps, when do you think the CFL is going to come down on this banjo brawling? Because there's going to be fines. I don't think there'll be any more suspensions. There's going to be maximum fines. I think this league, watching Andrew Harris grab onto Christian Campbell's face mask and slam him to the ground and do everything possible to hurt that player, and he gets an unnecessary roughness. I guess it's more important. I guess it's worse. And we're not letting the Riders off the hook. AJ Hendy's flapped a guy.
They did what they did. They should have been disciplined. But again, we're being selective here. What about the Bombers? It takes 2 to tango.
It always
or the banjo.
How many times have you seen that kind of thing happen? It's 1-1-1-1. It's even 2.
Yeah.
I still, to be honest with you, I was writing my synopsis and I wrote Andrew Harris has been kicked out, and then I look up in the middle of the early third quarter and Andrew Harris is still in the game. Well, how did he not get kicked out? And it was right in front. Like, I didn't see it all because the Banjo Bowls has interesting sight lines, but when you watch on the highlights, it just seemed like a no-brainer that he gets kicked out. Now, gets suspended because I don't think he'll get suspended. I think he'll be fined, and it'll create another.
What good does that do?
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
they get fined half a game check. I think the max is half a game check, which seems to bounce every year and year from CBA. So it's not a significant amount of money for them.
but
But
the ship has sailed. The Rough Riders lost a game in which a player who is very key to the outcome, very key to the opposition, was allowed to keep playing. So you could fine him $58 million. It wouldn't do the Rough Riders any good.
no, it's not. You think they
So
would have beat him if Andrew Harris was out of there? I don't know. The way that second half went, I think it was almost self-determined that the bomb.
perhaps, but I mean, it's another factor. And, um, as soon as Cody Fajardo gets hurt, you just think this just isn't their day completely. But that said, I mean, they were still in both those games as a depleted team. And maybe that's the frustrating thing, because you see glimmers and you see that there's despite the composition of the roster, they are able to at least accomplish some things. And they certainly had, especially this past Saturday, had chances to score a lot more points than the 9 they ended up putting up. Another officiating gaffe was the non-pass interference near the Bomber goal line when Ricardo Lewis was going up for the ball. I thought that the defensive back had his back to the quarterback and was facing the player and shoved him in the chest.
Yeah.
It wasn't as flagrant a pass interference as Ed Gainey the previous week, but it was still pretty clearly pass interference. And that would have put the Rough Riders inside the 5-yard line. And how would that have changed things?
Yeah,
So that to me, that's pass interference.
Craig challenged it too and still couldn't get it.
Yeah.
So that's still,
what's going on with the command center?
Sometimes the command center would normally, I don't know if the command center would send it out or someone, they would tweet an explanation of why this call happened. In that case, it was warranted. It was also warranted in the case of the brawl. They could have said Andrew Harris was not ejected because this is not deemed to be unnecessary. It's not an ejectable offense. It's more unnecessary roughness under some CFL rule. And then it doesn't cool down Rider Nation, but at least you have an explanation right there. And Twitter's immediate. It's right away. Why wait and just have people trying to figure things out? Why not do it right away? So I'm not sure what the command centers. They've done it in the past, but I realize maybe the CFL is a little shorter staffed. They don't have someone sitting there.
It comes down to accountability, though. I mean, again, I go back to Craig Dickinson. I go back to Cody Fajardo. And not long ago, Cody Fajardo admirably yet excessively blamed himself for the outcome of a Rough Rider loss. But Cody Fajardo is accountable. Craig Dickinson is accountable. The officials aren't accountable. Why aren't the officials? Why isn't an official accessible after the game? Why can't at least an official talk to a pool reporter and get their interpretation of a play that is pretty crucial to the outcome, or at least at the time seemed to be pretty important? Why is there no official explanation right off the top, at the outset, of why Andrew Harris remains in the game, why there isn't a pass interference penalty, etc.? Why is the accountability, this is my word of the day, so selective? Why do the officials get a free pass? And players make a lot more mistakes during games than officials, and coaches probably do too. So I'm not absolving the players and the coaches for their role in the outcome. But if a player makes a mistake, they have to answer for it. If a coach makes a mistake, they have to answer for it. At least they should. An official, nope. You can't even criticize them, or you're going to get fined. So I mean, it's such a double standard, and it's just absolutely ludicrous.
I think in baseball, the umpires explain their calls, don't they? Do they do it a little bit?
Yeah, they've got that system, or that involves a pool reporter. But there's nothing like that.
Yeah, in football, there's nothing like that in the NFL either. So it is kind of strange. So what do you think about this weekend? We have a couple of things on the lines with the Riders this weekend. It's the introduction of proof of vaccine or proof of a negative COVID test. We'll have to see how many people are standing in line and see how the Riders do that. I tweeted in Winnipeg. It was easy. I showed them we don't have the QR code in Regina, Saskatchewan yet, but I showed them my little vaccination card, and they looked at it, and I showed them ID for my driver's license, and I was in. And I went to a number of places in Winnipeg, and most of them you got to wear a mask. There's not too many places you can go in without a mask, and you have to show them ID. Again, every restaurant you have to show them you've been vaccinated to go in with the accompanying.
Imagine that, common sense.
Yeah, and no one appeared to be put out by it. No one said, "Oh, geez, I can't believe it." I made the same joke about 10 times that in Saskatchewan they just trust us. To which
and how's that working out so far?
Yeah, exactly. And the servers all kind of looked at me. I thought they might step back, finding out I was from Saskatchewan, knowing I'd be probably infected with COVID. So I was impressed. And the whole Banjo Bowl experience was the same as usual, except there weren't the Rider fans. And I think we noticed that at the Labor Day Classic. There weren't these huge pockets of Rider fans that you get at a Banjo Bowl. Like even outside, they have a Rider sort of tailgate set up a little bit. They've had in the past. I think I'm sorry, I can't remember. I think they had it in 2008. That wasn't set up this time. It was just kind of like more Blue Bomber oriented, not Rider oriented, which may be another COVID related thing. But the parking lot was the most tailgaters I've ever seen at any game in the CFL, even Calgary. And Calgary has a huge group of tailgaters, so they kind of got away with that. I don't know how they get away with it. Well, they're all vaccinated, so they can all have fun together. So
yeah, I mean, although there's no way of hermetically sealing the environment outside the stadium. We're presuming that all those people went in, but that's not necessary. There may have been some tailgaters who were oozing COVID from every pore, but they just opted not to go to the game.
Yeah, maybe, hopefully. I don't think I was around it, but I knew that I wore my mask everywhere, and now because of the city of Regina rules, we have to wear masks in the press box all the time too, which I don't mind. I just had to go and find one that didn't hurt my ears. I can only imagine what healthcare people are going through wearing them all the time. At least I get
and that heavy PPE and doing it for 12 and 14-hour shifts.
I just can't
and the
imagine.
Poor doctors and nurses are just being overrun right now.
Yeah. Well, we're not any further than we were this time last September.
Well, look at these
numbers. We're getting to watch football.
Look at these numbers. It's
yeah, but what's the common factor in these numbers, Rob? The common factor is it's not vaccinated people.
But vaccinated people are still getting it. They're in the minority, obviously, the clear minority.
Corey Jones got it, and he's double
it is worrisome when you can take every precaution and still be susceptible to it. But I mean, the numbers of unvaccinated people who are now going to hospitals and needing treatment, this is preventable. And the symptoms can be mitigated. Just get a vaccine. You're not asking a lot. I mean, I don't believe, and I had an encounter last week in the park, which maybe made me ultra sensitive to this issue, but I was taking my dog for a walk in Wascan. I got accosted by an anti-vaxxer who was just obnoxious. And I mean, that's what our society's coming towards. Is this going to happen outside the stadium on Friday night? I know there's been talk about protests. Are we going to have to deal with this crowd even getting into a football game, or is the average citizen going to have to be dealing with it? There's talk about protests at hospitals. There's been the memorial removed outside the legislative building. I mean, just awful things are happening, and it's only going to get worse as the numbers escalate and tempers flare, and there are more restrictions that inevitably take place. And yet we're carrying on going to sporting events like nothing has ever happened. And I sure hope that continues, but there's times that I wonder, it just seems incongruous to me that in an environment now where we're getting 400 or 500 cases a day, we're just going to football games and sitting, or hockey games or whatever, and just sitting next to people and carrying on like we used to. And I hope it continues. I hope we haven't had a super spreader event that's been a Rough Rider game or even a Pats exhibition game or SJHL game or anything like that. But boy, I wonder what happens if one sporting event turns out to be an incubator. And the impetus for a large number. Are we just starting from square one again?
I think we're going to keep just going on, and I really think people are going to have to get used to life with COVID. And unfortunately, there's going to be cases, people are going to be dead, and people are going to die. And it's the way life is. And is it right or wrong? No, it's the way we're going to have to live. You get your vaccine, you do all you can to stay healthy, you wear your mask, you wash your hands, you do some social distancing even then. But I think it's just the way of life now. This is our way of life. And then I'm not all in favor of draconian measures like lockdowns and stuff. I just think people just got to move ahead and life goes on. I'm sorry, Rob, but get vaccinated. Get vaccinated.
I'm not a lockdown advocate either. I'm a common sense advocate. A vaccine passport doesn't equal a lockdown. It just makes sense. Wearing a mask doesn't equal a lockdown. It just makes sense. It's easy to do. I mean, a lot of people are suspicious of the COVID vaccine. I received my second inoculation in early July, and it was so harmful. This toxic vaccine that people are talking about, it was so harmful that the day after getting the shot, I was only able to ride my bike 112 kilometers. So yeah, it's really dangerous, folks. And I'm 57 years old. I got diabetes, and I have an underlying condition. And I was able to ride my bike 112 kilometers that day. I'm not saying yay for me. I'm saying yay for the vaccine. It's not at all dangerous. Listen to the experts and listen to your doctor. You would trust your family doctor if he, at least in most cases, if he or she told you that, do this to guard against this to guard against this to guard against this. But suddenly there's an element of distrust in some circles, as misguided as they are when it comes to vaccines. I realize we're meandering and straying from the point of this podcast, but it just comes back to it is all within the realm of sport. The way there's now an intertwinement, because you can't talk about going to a Rough Rider game, especially with the way the vaccine situation is leading up to Friday, without talking about vaccinations and how impactful it could be, and how impactful COVID has been and could be. And eek.
Just one of the things, I got a flu vaccine for the first time in my life this year. I've got 2 COVID vaccines, and I haven't had a cold or a sniffle since I look back since March 8th, 2020. We came back from Mexico, and I haven't had any of those symptoms, anything. That's a long time to go without a cold. Usually I get one little. So maybe maybe this does something, or maybe it's just social distancing and not being near anybody.
I'm going on 23 months. I had the worst case of bronchitis in my life leading up to the West Final in 2019.
I remember that. That was
awful.
Sound.
So I mean, I wouldn't bet against the Riders getting to the West Final again. How's that for a smooth segue back into football, despite what happened this past weekend? I mean, they're 3-2. Edmonton's 3-2. The West looks like it's going to be pretty even after you deal with it. After talking about after factoring or after considering the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and if Zach Collaros gets hurt, everything changes in Winnipeg.
First place in the West might be a pipe dream, Rob. I think first
place. I think you can forget that unless Zach Collaros gets hurt. If Zach Collaros gets hurt next week, the Bombers could go from 5-1 to 5-7 in an awful hurry.
Well, the way Sean McGuire handles quarterback sneaks, they could just quarterback sneak him all the way up the field.
Second and 9, third and 8 punt. That could change everything, and it's no different than virtually any team in the league. Even Hamilton, people thought Hamilton is really well protected here because they've got Jeremiah Mazzoli and Dane Evans. So if A gets hurt, they go to B. And now you're talking about David Watford. So that's how quickly things can change. And if you remember the season opener in 2019 in Hamilton, the Riders ended up using 3 quarterbacks that day, as they did the second game of the 2008 season. Marcus Crandall, Stephen Giles, and somebody named Darian Durant. So it can change that quickly. We may see Paxton Lynch before too long. The way the quarterbacking situation can be in flux.
Also remember. With Zach, I hate to take it. In 2015, he was off to an incredible start too, and I think it was a knee injury. Was it a knee injury? I think it was
Edmonton.
Against Edmonton, and then he was gone.
Yeah.
So that's
how quickly it can change.
Yeah.
And one play, we saw that last week. Cody Fajardo gets hurt, and it was the first time that he's been hurt in a game where he's been forced to miss time. Last year, 2 years ago, he got hurt in practice.
Yep.
So no, I should lie. I'm lied. The 2019 opener in Hamilton, he also went through concussion protocol that day, and that was the introduction of Isaac Harker. But it's the first time Cody Fajardo has been hurt as a starter in a game where he's had to miss time.
I don't think we have to blame. I don't think there's blame on the offensive line for what Willie Jefferson did on that play. It was just a great play by a great player.
That's just what Willie Jefferson does.
Yeah.
You can only do so much against him, and that's the kind of pressure that the Bombers apply. But I think what the Riders were able to get away with that offensive line in the first 3 games of the season, you can't get away with against Winnipeg.
No.
And Winnipeg's secondary is so good that, you can pick away with these little 4 and 5 yard passes against the other teams, but suddenly you do that against the Bombers, and you're facing a much better secondary and linebackers who can defend. Yeah. And suddenly, as Hank Stram would say, matriculating your way down the field isn't quite as easy. And so it's one thing to do that against other teams. And that'll be interesting this coming Friday because we don't really yet know who's going to be the Argos defensive coordinator. It's likely going to be Rich Stubler. We don't know what the Chris Jones thing is going to amount to. But if it's Rich Stubler, that's the classic bend but don't break defense. So you would have to pick your way down the field. But you probably are going to get that opportunity. The Rich Stubler defense isn't as pressure oriented as, say, a Chris Jones defense would be. Although Chris Jones can rush 8 guys on one play and send 2 the next, or 3. Yeah. So it wouldn't be as the Chris Jones defense, and there probably isn't even sufficient time to install a lot of the elements of it. Would certainly create more confusion than a Rich Stubler defense. You know what you're getting with Rich Stubler.
Never say never in this.
Screen, hook, slant, screen pass, run play. That's what you have to do because you're not going to go over the top against a Rich Stubler defense.
Never say never in the CFL, but I kind of never thought Chris Jones would be back up here so soon. Like, just imagine what it did to those poor kids down there in that high school. Their coach, like, high school coaches are pretty impactful, at least in any level. And he leaves to go take a job, the best job and opportunity that he couldn't turn down. But only played one game due to COVID influences.
Does this surprise you? I mean, look how quickly he left the Calgary Stampeders for the Toronto Argonauts, to the extent that the Argonauts were disciplined for tampering. He wins a Grey Cup with the Edmonton Eskimos, and boom, he's in Saskatchewan right after that. He signs a contract extension with the Roughriders, and a week after that's announced, he's off to Cleveland. So when there's enough,
there's enough.
Maybe this is a bad choice of words considering what happened last week. But when you consider the considerable sample size, much larger sample size than was available after the Labor Day Classic in one case, of Chris Jones's resume, that's what happens. Yeah. If you hire Chris Jones, you'd better be prepared to have to pivot at some point. And the Roughriders were able to pivot seamlessly, as it turned out, with Craig Dickinson, Jeremy O'Day. And it was Jeremy O'Day who signed Cody Fajardo and addressed the one issue that it seemed that Chris Jones couldn't address in Saskatchewan, that was quarterbacking, despite saying he was going to look under every stone. Yeah. Hello there, Vince Young. Although he may have found, we'll always wonder how, and this is, I think it's pertinent to ask this now, how would Zach Collaros have fared in Saskatchewan had the system been conducive to success? And I wrote about this earlier in the week. And Zach took a lot of heat. He took it from me. He took it from you. He took it from a lot of people. But when you look back on it with the benefit of hindsight and perhaps the acquisition of more perspective than was apparent at the time, did Zach Collaros even have a chance in Saskatchewan? A solid chance given all the factors that were working against him? I enumerated them in my column earlier this week, or last week, pardon me. But I'm not sure that that system just wasn't built to fail, and Zach Collaros bore the brunt of it.
But didn't Cody Fajardo step into that system and have pretty good success, though, Rob?
He did, but guess what? They had playmakers for Cody Fajardo.
They did, yeah.
They quickly showed faith in Cody Fajardo by saying, "You're our guy," to the extent that he was that there was a trade and Zach Collaros was shipped to the Toronto Argonauts and subsequently to Winnipeg. But they had the fake quarterback competition.
Oh, I know. I still get
up to 2018. The Riders trade for Zach Collaros, pay him more than $400,000, and then just say, well, the quarterback position is going to be subject to competition between Zach Collaros and Brandon Bridge. So that's, it's comical, but that's the charade that they tried to sell us. So inevitably, Zach Collaros is a starter, and then 2 games into the 2018 season, by then Bakari Grant is gone. So they've lost one of their 1,000-yard receivers from 2017, and then they move Jerron Carter over to defense.
Yeah.
And so suddenly the most dangerous player on offense, someone who's named the Roughriders' most outstanding player in 2017, is no longer part of the equation. And you're starting to work in Shaq Evans, and you're starting to work in later in the season Kyran Moore. Those turned out to be great moves, and Jones and John Murphy are to be commended for finding them. But that didn't do Zach Collaros any good in the short term.
No.
And so suddenly you're looking at a depleted receiving core. Then for an August game at Edmonton, they moved Jerron Carter back to receiver, actually put him at slot back, runs past Aaron Grimes, which not a lot of people do, catches a 41-yard touchdown pass. You're thinking, yeah, the Riders lost in Edmonton, but Zach Collaros threw for 261 yards, and they've got a semblance of a vertical passing game, and then they cut Jerron Carter and don't explain it.
Yeah,
and they didn't. Chris Jones was masterful in how he worked with Jerron Carter in 2017, but he stopped having those meetings with him and wasn't getting the best out of him in 2018. So this is a really long, meandering way of saying I don't think Zach Collaros really got a fair chance here.
Yeah, it was funny. We dealt with Zach in a lot of time.
The play calling was ridiculous.
Yeah. Also, the personality was so different from the one I see with Winnipeg than he was with the Riders. Actually, Zach's shown a sense of humor with Winnipeg. The other day goes after McGuire scored his third 1-yard rushing touchdown. Zach says, "Why didn't people throw their hats on the field? Isn't this Canada? Isn't this hockey? Isn't recognition of a hat trick?" I went, I never saw that. Was like, not that makes any difference to playing, but that's in Saskatchewan, your quarterback's got to sell your franchise. He's the face, regardless of any quarterback who ever comes here, they have to be the face of the franchise. And if you're not going to accept that role, then you don't come to Saskatchewan.
And don't accept the paycheck.
And don't
Because
accept
that's
the
part
paycheck.
of it.
Because Cody Fajardo has embraced that role. And I think people really haven't had a chance to see what he can really be like in this. I thought in this, because of COVID, because there's no interaction with people. And I think people would have been able to see Cody would have owned it. He owns this. He could have owned this brand and this market outright without any problems. And he does in our minds.
And he ultimately will. And if
Since
Isaac
COVID,
Harker were to become that guy, he would too. Isaac Harker is as tremendous a person as has ever played for this franchise. So they, and Zach Collaros, I think, is a very good person as well. He was just a good person in a bad situation. And in his situation, I probably would have been as sour as he was too. And once he gets here, the incessant questions, and they're valid. But he was asked all the time about his concussion history, and he got sick of talking about it. But it seems that every interview he did, or most of them, people were introducing these negative factors into the sessions, and I think it just poisoned everything right off the bat. And then it just wasn't a good mix.
What was their record in 18? Do you remember?
They were 12-6. Zach Collaros was 10-4 as a starter.
Yeah,
it's pretty defense heavy though.
Yeah, that's not bad. I know that picks it away at looking
at it.
Collaros
threw 9 touchdown passes and 13 picks.
That's true.
But again, what did he have to work with? He had a first-year Shaq Evans and a first-year Kyran Moore and a Naaman Roosevelt who would suddenly not become a deep threat. No more Bakari Grant, and Duron Carter no longer part of the equation. So I don't know what realistically people could have expected other than what happens. Yet a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, I kept calling him the $410,000 quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I remember Tom Clements in 1979 when he came here. And Tom Clements didn't have anybody around him, and he looked more like Tom Rosance or Tom Mickey than he did Tom Clements. He threw two touchdowns and 11 interceptions in 7 games with the Rough Riders in '79 before he was traded to Hamilton. And guess what? He suddenly looked like Tom Clements again, as he did in Winnipeg and as he'd done before in Ottawa. But there's only so much you can do if you don't have Tony Gabriel and you don't have Art Green and you don't have these weapons that are you don't have Jim Coode and that kind of offensive line in front of you. You don't have the things that Tom Clements benefited from in Ottawa and subsequently in Saskatchewan. And Cody, Zach Collaros was really hampered by what was around him. And I really wonder, in hindsight, would that opportunity have been there if not for that fateful third play in Hamilton? Because Cody Fajardo would have had, I think, a head coach in Craig Dickinson who was more encouraging. Shaq Evans, we saw what a player he was in 2019, as we did with Kyran Moore, etc. So could Cody Fajardo, could Zach Collaros have ultimately have maybe not replicated, but at least had the type of year that would have led people to applaud the quarterbacking, as was the case when people stood to applaud Cody Fajardo after he took over? Because Stephen McAdoo certainly seemed a lot more amenable to throwing the ball over the top in 2019 with Cody Fajardo than he did in 2018 with Zach Collaros. But Zach Collaros he can fire the ball deep, I think, as well as anybody in the CFL.
Speaking of former riders, there's a few of them coming to town this weekend.
Oh yes,
on the Argos with Cameron Judge and. I think I'm not 100% sure. Charleston Hughes is going to be a game time decision, I think. Yeah, I remember he said he had the calendar, the date circle on the calendar that he was going to blow up the Riders. I think that's just he was talking about the frustrations of the deal not working out and stuff. So he'll be here. Darius Bladdock will be here. I don't think Philip Blake is healthy yet. I think he got hurt the last. It's when you see those triple headers.
This is the Hughes Judge Bowl.
The Hughes, yeah.
That's what people are going to be, especially Charleston Hughes.
Yeah.
And neither of them's had a great year in Toronto. Cameron Judge has 5 tackles in 9 games, and no picks, no fumble recoveries, no sacks. Charleston Hughes, who's led the CFL in sacks the last 4 years, has not registered a sack yet this year, and he's been battling a hamstring injury. And
I think it's a knee or a hand. I think it's
Toronto media is reporting hamstring. The CFL of injury list is reporting knee. So It's like the Jordan Williams-Lambert thing. Is it a non-football related injury? Or is
I know.
Yes.
So we gave kudos for the CFL for the injury report being transparent, and now we're looking at going, I don't know if it's all this non-football related injury. like Jacob Dearborn has been on a non-football related injury for 2 weeks.
That's going to be the CFL's substitute for upper and lower body injury.
Yeah, non-football.
Let's say you hurt your wrist playing football and you stub your toe playing ping pong. Do they just defer to the stub toe and say non-football related injury? Technically, they're not lying. You do have a stub toe. I can see all sorts of gymnastics and contortions.
I guess we can say at least they're
it's the Canadian Football League. So, I mean, Craig Dickinson is not going to be one of the coaches who's going to widely circumvent that or play games. But we know that there are others around the league that'll.
Well, look who's coming back. The king of the playing games with the practice rosters. I hate to say it, Chris Jones. There was no one better at it.
Yeah.
He really knew how to manipulate the practice roster. And so did Eric Tillman. You had to do a pretty good job.
Is the Chris Jones thing for Toronto official yet? We're recording this on a Monday, a Wednesday, shortly before noon.
Nothing's official.
Nothing's official yet?
Well, I haven't seen anything official, but his quote sure sounded like he was doing something.
Yeah, well, you don't leave in the middle of the season without having something locked down.
Yeah. So I think in the Stubler thing, I was just kind of thinking if I was, Glenn Young and Josh Bell are both out on leave. You can't. There's no reason why, but it's all basically because MLS. He says you can't, if you're not vaccinated, you can't work for him unless you're in a union. So obviously, you can connect the ties. You can make the ties connect, but we don't know for sure. Even if I was Ryan Dinwiddie, how comfortable would you feel knowing Chris Jones was there, considering his background? Does it take away some of the? Is it a distraction?
If I'm Ryan Dinwiddie, I want Chris Jones on my coaching staff. Say what you want about the man. He's good at what he does.
Oh,
he won't be good at what he does for a decade anywhere. Well, he was with Montreal for a while, but if you need a quick fix to your defense, if you need somebody who's as great a defensive mind as there has been in the history of the Canadian Football League, you bring in Chris Jones, and it's a year-to-year proposition in the Canadian Football League anyway.
Yeah.
I think Ryan Dinwiddie's looking to help his team, and he's done that. This is an Argo team that's in first in the East, but they've allowed more points than they've scored. We'll see if that holds true on Friday night.
Well, I'm kind of looking forward to Friday night in a sense. More football, Friday night football under the lights. Weird time, 7:45, but I think it's a double header.
Why not make it 8 so that you can make sure the games don't overlap? You're going to make it 7:45, make it 8.
Yeah, just do that right away, and then. Because there's only 2 games, and what's TSN got on after this? They're going to have Sports Center? Well, Sports Center can start 15 minutes late, can it?
No, not at all, because it's SC with Jay Onright. And on Tuesday night, Jay Onright gave a plug to my beautiful dog, Candy, on the air. And on Twitter, Jay also noted that Candy is now the mascot of SC with Jay Onright. And this is Candy right here, her weekly cameo. She's sleeping through a podcast, Mur.
Doesn't she always sleep through the podcast?
She would sleep through a hurricane, but
well,
anyway.
Congratulations on that. I'm sure it's an accomplishment that gives Candy pause for thought, and it's going to be a tale she'll tell many way down the road, and she'll probably start her own SC dog pound.
Well, Candy's a big sports fan. I mean, she's a fan of Jim Barker. I remember Basil Bark, who used to play for the Calgary Stampeders, Lindy Ruff, NHL head coach. There's so many.
You can.
Well, this has gone to the dogs. I'm going to read the outro. Murray, unless you have anything really enlightening to say, and anything is more enlightening than me talking about my dog, I'll read our little thing at the end, and we will send everyone on their merry way. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. My elocution today is just wonderful. Now I've jinxed it. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. I get my podcasts on Apple. If you'd like to send us a question, you can email Rob Vanstone at rvanstone@postmedia.com, and we'll read it on the show. We have not yet received a question this year. We welcome all questions. You can follow me, Rob, on Twitter at Rob Vanstone, or Murray at MurrayLP. And if you go on that Twitter account, you will find a clip of Jay Onright saluting Candy on Tuesday night. So there. That's awesome. What a lovely segue that was.
That is truly a moment I'm going to look forward to seeing.
I cried. And now Candy's left.
We'll be back next week.
With that, we will. For Murray McCormick, I'm Rob Vanstone on behalf of Candy and Jay Onright, and we'll do this again next week if you'll have us. Take care and have a great day and stay safe.